with Kelly Reeves doing our candle for us.
Good morning, everyone. How are y'all? Good. I've been a part of this church since I was a little girl, and I left for a little while, but the most important thing was Tom was my youth director when I was in 6th grade. A lot of y'all don't remember that. It was my first year. It was my first year in youth, but his last year, unfortunately,
You
in youth.
still look so young. Yeah.
And then I circled back after college and came back over here, and it's just been a joy, and this is my home, and I hope this is your home too. Join me in the welcome candle. Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving it. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again.
Would y'all stand and sing with us now? A song that celebrates our interdependentness. Oh, and you can bring your offering to the table right now. We know this river always keeps flowing. We will be rowing our whole lives long. And we may never know where we're going, but we can go there singing a song. Verse 2, just like a mother to a child she's holding, just like a soldier marching along, just like the faithful on Sunday morning, raising our voices, singing a song. All right. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it right. Sing it in 4/4 time. Sing it with the heart wide open. Sing of the beauty right there beside you. Bring it inside you, making you strong, so that when trouble comes round to greet you, still it will lead you, singing a song. Rock out. Eyes will shine, here we go. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it rhyme. Play it in 4/4 time. Sing it with the heart wide. May the music of life overtake us, till angels mistake us for a heavenly throng. And may that joyful sound be our shelter, and bind us together, singing a song. We'll be together, singing a song. That's almost perfect right there, I gotta say. Would y'all take a moment and offer one another a sign of peace?
Here. Ed, I wonder if you throw up our first two slides. Oh, is that the slide? Oh, that is the slide. Ed, I wonder if you go to the first two slides of the message, and then we'll come back to that. I forgot to tell you to switch that out. I want to set up this, and then go to the first two slides, or the first slide right now. There we go. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one, from our friend Father Einstein, our priest of the science. And then this one, the one from one of my favorite writers, the transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "There's an optical illusion about every person we meet." Wow. That's kind of hard to imagine, really, because we pretty well made up our minds about the people we meet. Right? I mean, we do. We kind of look at each other and go, "Oh, there's that person. Oh, there's that. Oh, there he is. There she is. I know exactly who they are." And even when we see how someone acts, we think, well, that's who they are. But they're acting out of all sorts of narratives and all sorts of conditioning and all sorts of illusions that they're bringing to the table too. So neither of us is really that much in touch with what's really going on. That's the hard thing, I think, is to try to get hold of that. And then I have this one, which is one of my favorite, and I apologize for the children. Cover your children's faces. I won't say it. You can just read it. What I really love about it is it's an Escher, right? It's an Escher kind of thing, and it's just the reality that sometimes reality is so convoluted and confusing. And we think if we just try one thing, it's going to solve the problem. It's hard to be in this reality where things seem to be going one direction, and yet we suddenly discover, oh, that can mean 5 different things. We need someone in here to try to define it for us. That's what it feels like. And the reality is that it's just not that definable sometimes. So how do we live in the midst of it? So today we're talking about Pentecost, because today is traditionally in the Protestant church and in the Catholic church, it's the day of Pentecost. About 50 days after Easter, the 5 weeks weeks of Feast of Weeks, which happens after Passover for the Jewish community, and so Pentecost kind of arose out of that tradition, out of Jewish Christians or Jewish Jesus followers, who then sort of adapted this idea and this tradition. And it occurs in Acts, the book of Acts, the story. But we're talking about what does it mean then to be in the presence of Spirit? What does that even mean, Holy Spirit? When you talk about Holy Spirit, the first thing we think about is speaking in tongues. We think about the whole Pentecostalism movement that actually came out of Wesleyan tradition back at the early 1900s. It came out of the holiness part of Wesleyanism, and there's this whole gifts of the Spirit. Now, I myself had a nice little stint with the Pentecostal church. I spent about 7 months in the Pentecostal church here in Fort Worth. I, too, as a young adult, spoke in tongues. There was a young woman in the group that I was very fond of. She spoke in tongues. I thought, well, I better do that, too. we kind of sidled up next to each other and spoke in tongues together. Until after about the first couple of nights, and when we would do this, and she looked over and she said, "Are you speaking Spanish?" And the truth be told, I was under the illusion that if I just imitated what everybody else was doing, then I must be doing the same thing. But I was basically garbling up Spanish with all sorts of other things and gibberish. And so I was exposed, and felt pretty much what would you feel when you're exposed like that? I felt the other thing that such environments often like when you don't fit in. I felt lots of great shame, and just kind of wallowed in that for a while. So we have these realities that we orient around, and we assume that's the way things are. But the reality is if you look out over time, you see where systemic problems just get more and more ingrained, like a family that can't get out of its dysfunctional system, like a relationship that's stuck in its dysfunctional reality, or an addict who's stuck in their dysfunctional addiction because they can't see the pattern they're living, right? And so in a sense, what you might even think of is you could actually call those folks zombies. You could actually call them zombies because they are lifeless, stuck in the same reality. And so when Brad and Kagan and I met, this song came to my head, Zombie, by the Cranberries. And it's a hard song to listen to for a number of reasons, because if you've been over to Ireland, you've been there at that place along the border where the conflict with Catholics and Protestants, with Northern Ireland and England, where the conflict has been going on, as the song will say, since 1916. Well, of course, now they're under a peace accord. But that conflict was so ingrained for centuries, that even if you ask people, they don't know why, other than they know they've been a part of it for centuries. And the conflict continued. They were living like zombies. And we have ourselves now in the midst of just another 20 or 30 years we've been at this, and there's been another gun violence, another mass shooting, another reality that we find ourselves in this kind of tragic reality. And we think that's the problem, and then they think, no, that's the problem. And then we find ourselves right back in the same pattern of being, that where if an alien were to visit and see who we are after the last 10 years, they'd go, oh, I guess they like this reality, because nothing's changed. We still live the same way, the same divisiveness, the same arguments, and the same suffering and violence. So there's something going on. We're all living like zombies. So I invited the band to stay up there because they're going to do some other stuff. And Kagan will be up there joining them. And I don't know if you felt this. I mean, if you think about where we are and where we've been, and of course you think about Ireland and where Ireland's been, and I'm dual citizen, right? So, I mean, my father was born in Ireland. I have relatives who fought on both sides of those conflicts. And I've been sitting down when I've been over in performances over there in Ireland and sat at tables after performing at a festival there, and both sides would be at a table having a pint with me. And it wouldn't take more than about 10, 15 minutes. There with their wives there, the men would start getting into it. Someone wasn't there when we needed you. Someone wasn't there when you could see. How could you act the way? Before you knew it, we had had 2 pints, and they were already fighting at the table, even in times of peace. And of course, I was watching the wives who were looking at their husbands trying to calm them down, right? But they understood the illusion, but they were still having to live according to it, right? Some of us know the illusion when we're in the midst of it. Some of us can see it, we feel trapped in it. But the wives were like, come on, honey, now, come on, and calm down. And it made you realize, there's something else here. Right? There's something else here that nobody can see because we've been living the same narrative since 1916. Actually, hundreds of years. Or for us, we've been living the same narrative since shortly after the Revolution. Trust me, it's been a part of our illusion for a long time. And I'm not taking sides here. If I'm taking any side, I'm standing squarely in the middle and saying, this story is a lie. The story that's going on in our country is a lie. Now, things have to happen. You got a rabid dog that's killing people. If it's biting animals, there's destruction. You have to stop violence when violence is happening. You have to deal with poverty when poverty is there. You have to help hunger when hunger is there. But the reality of the narrative is that we are all living in this lie because it's been the way we've been living. To live in a different way, it's like Einstein. You don't solve the problem with the same reasoning that got you into the problem. So let's go to this next slide here, real quick, Ed. So I've said this many, many times. Suffering is pervasive, right? We can't seem to get away from suffering. It seems to be all around us. But also, if God, the very ground of our existence, is also an inescapable reality, if we can't get out of the reality of God's presence, whatever that is, the sacredness of life, the divinity of life, everything is holy, our favorite song that is holy now that Peter Mayer has been a part of in our lives for so long. The very ground of our existence is also an inescapable reality. Then maybe the problem of suffering is more about seeing and sensing and then resurrection than a contractual relationship with cause and effect. That's a complicated sentence. But that's what I want to try to explain to you. So Pentecost has come, and Pentecost is this time in our church when we think of it as being a sort of an identity, a mark of identity. That's what we think of in the story. I'm going to read it to you really quickly so that you can read along here. If you'll go back, Ed, now to that scripture text, and I'll read it real quickly so that we can talk about it. So John 14 is the first one. This is Jesus. The story is that Jesus is now back, and he's after his resurrection. He's talking to it's right before his death. But he's talking to his disciples, knowing that he's going to be killed. And so he says to this. Philip says to him, "Master, then show us the Father, so that we'll be content." I love that. Isn't that nice? Show us God, so we can be content. That's your number one problem right there. But we won't get into that just yet. "Whatever you request in this way I'll do. If you love me, show it by doing what I've told you. I will talk with the Father, and he'll provide you another." By the way, I'm reading the Message version. "Friend, I will leave you another friend. I'll provide you another friend, so that you will always have someone with you. Now this friend is the Spirit of truth." The godless world can't take him in because it doesn't have eyes to see him. Doesn't know what to look for. But you know him already because he has been staying with you and will even be in you. Okay, that's really interesting, this whole story, this whole John gospel, which is a gospel that's a mystical orientation to Christianity because it comes 100 years, 90 years, some 90 years after Jesus' death, and Jesus did not establish a new kingdom, and the old ideas of what they thought was going to happen didn't happen. What do you make out of Jesus now? So 90 years later, people begin to understand this understanding of who Jesus was and what Jesus did requires a different kind of response. So you have this mystic gospel that's trying to explain who Jesus was. Then we have the book of Acts, which is an earlier book. It's written some 15, 20 years after Jesus' death. And this is from chapter 2. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as if fire had appeared among them, and a tongue of fire rested on each one of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now, there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at the sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one of them heard these folks speaking in their own language. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not these who are speaking Galileans?" Now, Galileans, of course, were not a part of the same community. And how is it that we're hearing each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia, Egypt, and all the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, people from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. They're all speaking their languages, and yet we hear them speaking about God. And they were all perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" And then they said they're filled with new wine, right? They're drunk. Because that's what you do when you don't know what's going on. You try to label it. No, they're just all drunk. So here we have these two stories that speak about this event that in the church's history has become this idea that it's really about this labeling, this identity that you then are marked. And so over time, the church, when it became institutional, took this idea of Pentecost and the Holy Spirit, and it became sort of an extra thing that happens. That's not what I read in this story. I don't read in this story that an extra thing happens, and that's why. What I read in this story is that that there are those who can see it, and then there are those who cannot. And that when you do see it, something strange happens. You do look a little bit odd to everybody else. You are speaking a little bit language that's different from everybody else. But also, something else happens. You begin to understand. Do you all remember that song? Y'all going to sing along with me here? You ready? Baptist, Pentecostals, Church of Christ people, you ready? There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. That's too high. There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. And I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. Some of you are just kind of scowling at me. There's a sweet expression on each face. And I know that it's the presence of the Lord. Sweet Holy Spirit, heavenly. Okay, y'all know this song, right? Right? You remember this song. And it's always been interesting to me because you know where we sang this song? Among like-minded people. Everybody sang it because everybody understood it and it was everybody's language. They all were like-minded. Nobody was speaking a different language. Nobody was speaking something difficult or awkward. Nobody was disagreeing with anybody. They were all in that same place, and we're all going like, isn't this a sweet spirit? It's like ice cream. It's like candy. It has nothing to do with God. Isn't that hard to hear? Because you see, where God was in this story is God's in the middle of where it's confusing. They're all speaking different languages. How is it we understand? Do you know what the word understand means literally? I don't know where that is on this slide because I'm skipping around already. We'll come back to it. Oh, there it is. You take the root word of understand, it means to stand in the midst of in order to see clearly. It literally means to stand in the midst of. It doesn't mean to find a place where everybody agrees. It doesn't mean to find a place where it's comfortable. It doesn't mean how lovely this experience has been. It means to stand in the midst of until it starts to make sense. And that's hard for us to do on any side of the spectrum you find yourself on, because we're immediately wanting to go to where it's comfortable, where we know it's right. I got to spend a lot of time over the years working with kids who had cancer, right? And Brad's doing this great work now, working with Camp Care out in North Carolina. This was so much of a learning experience. I remember the first time I worked with Camp Care in North Carolina, and I was there as a storyteller and as a musician and as a drum facilitator. I was kind of artist residence. And one night they said, we want some storytelling. And so I said, all right, I'm going to do ghost stories because I know kids love ghost stories. And we were sitting around a campfire, and I told this story. And I've told this story at schools before. I've seen kids start to cringe. I've seen them start to wince when I told this story. And I was telling this story to these kids, and I thought, this fell flat. And I asked them, I said, y'all didn't like this story? I mean, have y'all ever really been scared before? And one of the guys next to me looked at me and said, try cancer. And it suddenly hit me, I wasn't listening. I wasn't present. I wasn't standing in the midst of things. I was bringing my agenda and trying to impress or connect in whatever way I could aside from being uncomfortable, right? One of the fun things that happens at these camps, and I'm sure they still happen, Brad, is that once you're at the dining table after the first day or two, you start feeling this, you start feeling this spirit, this energy that's with the camp, and pretty soon at the dining room, they'll be shouting from one end, we've got spirit, yes we do, we've got spirit, how about you? Do they still do that?
Ain't no flies on us.
Ain't no flies on us is another one. Yeah. So then on the other side, we'll say the same thing. We've got spirit. Yes, we do. We've got spirit. How about you? And it'll go back and forth until it's like a concert, like a Queen concert at a big football stadium. You know, we, and they're just banging on the tables. We got spirit. Yes, we do. And then it just becomes this loud, unified, we got spirit. We got spirit. And then the kids are jumping up on the tables and stomping. We got spirit. Even those with prosthetic legs, and we got spirit. And they're all banging, and the counselors are going like, should they be doing this up on tables? I mean, aren't we worried about stuff? And the kids are like, worried about stuff? I've got cancer. What are you worried about? And they're living. And so this thing starts to happen. And it occurred to me, that's not where the Spirit was. Right? Do you know where the Spirit was? The Spirit was when they came together, they recognized they have a shared reality that's beyond whoever they are, wherever they're from, whatever their backgrounds, whatever their affiliations, whatever their tribes, they're all sharing in a similar suffering, a similar reality. At the very core of their being, they don't acknowledge it, they may be not even conscious of it, but they're all there in the same boat. And that's what they were able to see without even really recognizing it, that I think so many of us can't see, that so many of us miss all the time. There's this, I think we find ourselves in this reality that we think of suffering as something that's supposed to be fixed. It's bad, it's wrong. And I'm not saying suffering's right. Nor am I saying violence is right. Nor am I saying, what I'm trying to get to the point of understanding suffering is what suffering really is. It's an illusion. Now you're going to say like, no, suffering's suffering. No, pain is pain, and hurt is hurt, and violence is violence. Suffering is an invitation. Suffering is an invitation to look more deeply at where we are in relationship to what's going on and who we are, and finding in the midst of that something we didn't know. The Spirit rises up in the midst of conflict. It's like I said a couple of weeks ago, the old Jewish notion where the son was asking his grandfather, who was a rabbi, why do we have to have the Torah on our hearts? Why do you keep saying have the Torah on our hearts? And the rabbi said, because when your heart breaks open, the Torah is there. The Spirit of God is there. When we break open, when we're vulnerable, is where we find it. Now, you might think we find it in our comfort zones, but here's what you have to do. You have to get outside the comfort zone to see how crazy it looks. Right? You literally have to go ahead and show this next one. Let's get to Jerry. Yeah, there it is. You have to be able to step outside of it. Because pretty soon you start realizing that this is just like the Jerry Springer Show. It's just like the people out there screaming, Jerry. I mean, look at that. There are people fighting, and the crowds are cheering. Right? And Jerry's just standing in the back watching and going like, isn't this interesting? I'm going to get rich off of this. But that's beside the point. The reality, that doesn't bother me at all. He's just a sideshow. The reality is, how is this happening? But the reality that we're in today is, guess what? We're no longer watching. We are the Jerry Springer Show. We are the screaming at one another, the immediate taking sides, the immediate craziness of being in this reality that is basically simply the same elusive, illusionary struggle that we've been in, and nothing's changed. Now, if you were an alien, like I said, you'd come down here. If you were an alien and being with us for being around us for 10 years, you'd probably conclude, as a friend of mine concluded once when she noticed that I was struggling with something, and I'd been struggling with it for years. People have been telling me otherwise. This is what you need to do, and I still keep struggling with it. And she said to me, oh, I guess that's because you like it. If aliens were visiting with us, I'm sure they would look at us and go, they like this way of being, because they've been this way for years and years and years and years, and nothing really changes. Now, you're going to be tempted to fall right back into your positions and your orientation and say, yeah, but that's wrong. Yeah, but this is right. This is my right. No, this is wrong. And I mean, you're going to go back and forth, and where are you going to be? Jerry, right back on the same stage, living out a mockery of our reality rather than trying to find the Spirit at the heart of things. So here's what's interesting. If you go to the book of the Old Testament and you look at the story of Babel, which happens in Genesis, it's an Old Testament story, a myth story, kind of an origin story. You know it. The people, the humanity, had been one voice. One voice. They were one identity. They decided we're going to make a big city now, and we're going to build a huge tower up to the heavens. And God looks down and says, we can't have this. This isn't right. We can't have this. So let's go down there and let's mix them up. Let's confuse them. So God goes down, confuses them all, scatters them in every direction because they can't understand each other now. What do you do when you can't understand someone? Typically, you run. You back away. Somebody scares you, they look weird, somebody's coming at you really strong. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily physically, but attitude-wise, and you back away because that's what we do. Or we get really defensive and we fight because that's also what we do. We just want suffering to go away, or we want to run from it, or we want to deny it, or we become victims of it. Never, ever do we think, oh, I'm going to go stand right in the middle of this, because that's hard to do. And yet, again, nothing changes until we're willing to face the reality that we find ourselves in. And that's a hard, hard place to be. It's a hard place to get for a number of reasons, because we think we are our identities. Well, we'll be dead pretty soon. Some of us sooner than others. Our identities will be gone. So what are we making out of who we are, unless we're participating at the heart of what reality is? That's my challenge to us. It's one thing to identify so harsh and so strictly with one thing that we think that's it. And in the meantime, Jerry Springer Show just keeps going on, just keeps happening. So in contrast, you get this wonderful story that follows Jesus' life, and what's Jesus' life been all about? But inclusion, bringing in the marginalized, sitting with the uncomfortable people, trying to be present to everybody. There were even Orthodox people hanging out with Jesus. You know, because he was doing something very different. What happened after that was you have this story of the Spirit once again coming in the midst, finding the Spirit in the midst of things. But it's just the opposite of Babel. Instead of confusion, when people find themselves in the midst of this Spirit, there's understanding. But here's the thing. It's still different. They're still from different parts of the world. They're still different languages. They're still different people. Some are still Gentiles. Some are Jewish. Some come from Jewish tradition. Some are coming out of Roman tradition and Gentile tradition. And yet there's a Spirit. So when I talk about how we connect with that Spirit, then I think the big challenge is for us to start to question how we deal with it. So let's go to the next slide real quick. The truth is we're in a toxic relationship with reality. And getting to the central cause of toxic relationship, whether family, school, company, church, denomination, or whether a country, it's hard to do because we all miss the larger point here in our like-minded tribes. We can't see the forest for the trees, the toxic relationship we have with violence or with polarization or discontentment. It's a one-sided problem, and yet it's the whole system. We're all part of the problem. We're all on the stage. We just don't often see it. And why don't we see it is because we go to our comfort spots, and we're able to point fingers. Easy. So we can still do that. There's a great book here. Let's go to this next one. This book actually keep going. We can keep going to the next one. Keep going. There we go. This guy, Bill Bishop, used to be a journalist, wrote a book back in 2009 called The Big Sort: Why the Clustering of Like-Minded America is Tearing Us Apart. I'll let you in on a little secret. When I see an ad that says, come join our church, where you'll find like-minded people, I'm thinking, that's Satan. That's the devil. You don't want to go there. Nothing changes there. You can feel good, you can get some things done, but nothing changes the world unless you're willing to be with people that aren't like you. That's how the world changes, right? And that's why it's so difficult. So in his book, he wrote, as people seek out social settings that make them feel the most comfortable, the nation grows more politically segregated. And the benefit that ought to come from having a variety of opinions is lost to the righteousness that is the special entitlement of the homogeneous group. Oh my God. Did you see that last part? The special entitlement that is part of our homogeneous group. We have this self-righteousness because it's part of our group and we know we're right. And we can tell you we're right because we got our group to back us up. So I'm still not arguing who's right or wrong here. I'm saying we need to find the Spirit. We're all missing the Spirit. We need to get in the middle of it and be with somebody. So you know what Bill Bishop did? He realized this wasn't going to change. And he did an interview last week. You can read it this last week. If you go to Politico.com, you can read the interview because somebody said, we've just had Uvalde. We're back where we've been for 3 decades or more. Nothing's really changing in our country. There's still more and more divisiveness over issues. Your book spoke about this stuff, and yet, who are you now in relationship to what's been happening? What do you see as our future? And this is what he said. He said, I don't really know what the future is. All I know is that I wasn't able to change it with my points or my arguments. So I decided to self-sort myself. So instead of living with my liberal, like-minded people, I've moved out to LaGrange, which is an 85% red county. He said, I'm a Democrat. I just got out of there because that's not real. He said, this isn't real. This is just standing on the stage arguing our point, fighting with each other. I went out there where I could live in the midst of things, but not because I wanted to argue, because I just wanted to be in the midst of others. So he said, this is what I discovered. I discovered that when there's a problem, when there's a conflict, guess what? Everybody comes to help. When there's a big problem in the community, everybody rallies. Now, if you're going to get political, they all go to their sides. But as long as you're talking about what people need and where people are in their lives, it seems like everybody rises to the occasion. They seem to have sidestepped the Jerry Springer show. That's my words, not his words. I think that's what Pentecost is all about. So I want to do some takeaways here real quick. Band's going to get, Kagan? Yeah, come on up. Yeah. I think this is what we're invited to do. To get out of this toxicity of this dysfunctional system, we have to be willing to do a couple of things. First of all, we have to be willing to recognize we're a part of the problem. Right? Whenever you go and you do an intervention with a systemic problem in a family, even when it's an addiction, it's never that person, it's the system. We're a part of the problem. So the first takeaway, I think, here is to check your own self-sorting. Is that coming up there? There you go. Yeah, check your own self-sorting. You know you don't have to because you know you do it. We all know we do it automatically. But check it. See how often it's happening during the everyday. See how many times during the day you self-sort. Oh, somebody sends you a funny text about this individual, this politician, or this argument, and you kind of laugh with it, and you do the ha-has, and you jump in, and you find your own, and you all start chiming in on the same thing, right? See how many times a day you literally self-sort as if that's what reality is. Check your own self-sorting. Monica Guzman wrote an interesting book that just came out, and she said, whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. Now, that's an important thing. Whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. Why? Because you don't know those people. You just think you do. So you've already projected on those others, and you've created a reality. Instead of the actual people, you'll see monsters. Instead of possibilities, you'll see disasters, and that's the challenge of a polarized world. So the first thing, check your own sorting, self-sorting. Second thing, this is what her book was called. Her book's called Fearless Curiosity. I love that. I haven't read the book yet. I've just looked at it and heard some interviews. Practice fearless curiosity in conversations with others. If somebody starts doing that and you've been self-sorting, see if you can't challenge it. They'll probably go like, oh, buzzkill. They'll probably go, I'm not going to sit. Let's exclude him from the future text in this group, right? But check your self-sorting and then show some fearless curiosity in finding out, what am I missing here? Why are we doing this? What am I actually saying here? What else is being felt here? Maybe there's somebody else in this person that I don't know, but I've just labeled them the same way that they've labeled me. Awe is a way of being in rapport with the mystery of our reality, and something is at stake in every moment. That's what Abraham Heschel said. Awe is a way of being in rapport with the mystery of all reality. Something is at stake in every moment. Last thing, and this I'm going to challenge you to do every day, and some of you will, and a lot of you won't. But how do you start facing the illusions that you find? You know how you start facing them? You start questioning them. You start noticing. Can I mention what you said to me earlier? Sure. Just because Kevin came up to me and he said, I did an 11 thing this week. And I said, what was that? Or just now. And I said, what was that? And he said, I noticed I had said something negative instead of saying something positive. He said, I just kind of automatically went to kind of a negative perspective on it instead of looking at it from a positive perspective. It was a small thing. He says, but I just realized I noticed it. I did a 5-week meditation practice in Colorado at this place where some of us went to in the town called Crescent. I think it was Crescent, is that what it's Crestone. Crestone, yeah. It's not too far from Stan and Mike's place. And so it was a wonderful place. It was during the winter. I did this meditation there. And the thing that's hard is that you're supposed to meditate for an hour or two in the morning, an hour or two in the afternoon, an hour or two in the evening. You do things in between. I couldn't stay focused for more than a minute, or unfocused as the case may be. I kept thinking thoughts. And I went to the head priest there, the Zen priest, and I said, my thoughts are all over the place. I can't get my thoughts out of my head. I keep noticing all my thoughts. And he smiled and he said, oh, good. You're noticing your thoughts. You see, we have to be still enough and be willing enough to actually notice what we're doing. Otherwise, we're just up on the stage reacting. We're just reacting. But until we begin to notice that we're reacting, we can't change our reactionary behavior. Nor can we change the world, and I'm going to argue, nor can we really touch the Spirit. Because the Spirit is in the heart of what connects us all, and we ain't doing that very well. So, take 5 minutes every day. Just try it. Just try it this week and see if you can't actually be still and start to notice your thoughts. And see if after a week of that, you don't start noticing other things that you're doing. Carl Jung said, someone had asked him, do you think humanity will make it? And Carl Jung said, if enough of us will do our own work.
Just a moment, breathe it all in. I know the world's confusing, things are changing every day. perfection doesn't mean rejection when you accept what you find. Looking inward is such a journey, oh, won't you peer inside? A wise man told me, don't banish your demons, it will make you feel alive. But rather get to know them, create peace inside your mind. Be still. Twist the cap off, releasing the chaos, such confusion and beauty. Every moment help build the frame for the masterpiece I see. Not a single thing is good or bad, is it was, it's me. Embracing all leaves room for forgiveness, allows you just to be. Just a moment, breathe it all in. I know the world's confusing, things are changing every day. This journey is history. Find your own way.
So, here's how you do it. I invite you to take just a moment before we hear the last song by John Lennon, which is a beautiful song. We get to sing it together, I think. But I'm going to invite you to do this. Just sit where you are, close your eyes if that helps you. You're going to hear some sounds, you're going to hear some noises. And I invite you to take a deep breath and in your head count to 5 as you inhale and count to 6 as you exhale. I invite you to do that 3 more times. And then 2 more after that with longer inhales and longer exhales. This last song is really our prayer. The song that John Lennon wrote, it's our prayer as we leave here, and it'll be our benediction. We've heard this song many, many times. If you imagine this song as a prayer that invites you into stillness in a way in which we can actually begin to imagine something different than the way we keep doing things, so that we might begin to see ourselves in relation to the Spirit that moves and has its being amongst all of us. It requires our willingness to breathe and to pay attention and then be still enough to see what else can happen. Amen.
It's easy if you
Okay. Go in pieces. We'll see you next time.